Welcome back to another version of Tip Tuesday. I say another version because we have got to the point where you can choose what exercise plan to follow and it will get you to your goal, so you're not going to be wasting your time. What we're going to get you next is one step further. Would you like to be able to design your own exercise plan? If the answer to that question is yes, stick around for the next couple of videos because that's exactly the topic that we are going to be covering. This is a disclaimer. It is not really an exact science programming. So exercise programming has got some science to it, but it also has some art to it. So it's kind of a balance between an art and a science, which just makes it a little bit more difficult to be concise in all areas. So in order to try and stick things to a certain pathway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine that I'm going to be programming at first for someone that is a complete beginner. If I have some sort of channel, it should get me to a better outcome for you guys to be able to actually have some value, not just value, just something tangible that you can walk away with and be like, okay, cool. So even if you aren't a beginner and you are an intermediate person, which most of the exercising population actually fits into the intermediate population, or if you're advanced, you will still be able to get really good value from these next videos. Especially if you've been making programs for yourself for quite some time. You might be already a qualified personal trainer, or you might just be someone that takes interest in their own health and has been making programs for themselves. It's really important that you get some certain things right in order to make sure that you're following the correct protocols, so that you're not putting yourself in a position where you're overtraining, or you're also not putting yourself in a position where you're kind of stagnating and just staying in the same phase for too long. I'm trying to speak into the future and give you some sort of idea about where we're going, but I also don't want to completely confuse you. So I think let's just jump straight into it. How does one go about picking exercises if you are a complete beginner? Well, before you actually do any sort of exercises, it's really important, so pick up from our last video, to do some sort of exercise testing to find out just where you've started, so that when you have completed a cycle of a program, you can go back and do the same test again and see if you've made any sort of tangible progress. Because if you haven't made any progress and you've been following a plan for weeks or even months, chances are that plan is not working for you, and your body will tell you, not just visually, that things are not going correctly. It will also tell you by, is your results getting better or not? So I have some one-on-one clients that I still take on at the moment, and they, even though their goal is not strength, I've made them do endurance tests, I've made them do strength tests, and in those two testing protocols, when I've now retested them after we've been together for another 6 weeks, they have seen strength gains, even though they're not exercising specifically for strength. They are kind of just out in that muscle building zone, which is just outside of the strength zone, but it's a really good sign if you are picking up like overall strength, to show that your body is acclimatizing to that little phrase that we've been talking about before, which is progressive overload. Okay, so doing your fitness test, very important to see where you are, and also if you are progressing, remember to always do the tests under the same conditions so that you can make sure that you're getting a measurable result. Okay, so what are the do's if you are a complete beginner? Do keep things super simple. Okay, it's important that you are not trying to add fluff or fancy stuff into a program if you are just starting out. First of all, if you do that, or if you get a program that is too advanced for you, you're going to feel really demoralized, because chances are you're not going to be able to actually be able to perform certain movements, and that can be really, really demoralizing. Secondly, you can hurt yourself. A little bit more important than the first one, but I also find that if people fall off the bus in terms of motivation, then that's also a really big reason why people don't continue. So first of all, you don't want to hurt yourself, and second of all, you don't want to demoralize yourself or get yourself kind of down because you're unable to perform a certain kind of movement. In order for me to define what movements are, this is when we're going to go into a little bit of the scientific side of the programming. So we're going to stick more with the facts and the science behind things. And in order for me to do that, I'm going to have to go through 4 terms, which basically define movement. It helps you put a movement into a certain category. And that's really helpful to know when you are doing some sort of program for yourself. If you are doing a movement that is only in one plane, which is what I highly, highly recommend if you are a beginner. Okay, so let's go through the planes. I'm going to go through the most common plane first, because it's the most important one, because most of our movements happen in this plane, especially if you're a beginner. All of these movements are going to be happening in this plane. It is called the sagittal plane. So basically, if you were standing straight up and your hands were by your sides, palms facing forward in the anatomical starting position, and you cut your body in half. So imagine there was a plane of glass. So like a piece of glass that cuts my body directly through the middle. It literally cuts my body into a left and a right side. Now, any movements that happen in the sagittal plane are ones that are perpendicular to this imaginary piece of glass that is cutting my body in half. Okay? So basically, any movement that you are using a hinge joint, where there is flexion and extension, there's flexion and extension happening. See, a bicep curl, or in this case, if I had a dumbbell in my hand, a hammer curl would be working in the sagittal plane because my arm is moving perpendicular to the imaginary piece of glass that is cutting me in half. If you think of most of our fundamental movements, they are going to be they're going to be falling into this sagittal plane. So another example, even though we're moving up and down, so this kind of confuses people sometimes. They get the bicep curl, the hinge joint is moving, there's flexion and extension happening, yes, but when you squat down, so say you're doing a squat, that is also a movement that is happening in the sagittal plane. Even though your body is moving up and down, the movement that is happening is your knee joint, pretend this is a knee, is going through flexion and extension, and your knees are going, they should be straight out in front of you. And as you bend down into the squat, the movement is happening perpendicular to the imaginary piece of glass that's cutting me in half. I hope that is making sense. If anyone's online right now, there's a couple of people online. If it's making sense, or if you have any sort of question, please, if it wasn't clear, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. Okay. The next plane I'm going to be talking about is called the frontal plane. And this makes people's brain a bit confused sometimes, because they hear frontal plane and they think it's movements that happen in front of you. Thank you for the confirmation. Cool, makes sense. The frontal plane means that we're cutting the body pretty much through the side. So imagine there's a pane of glass cutting me like in half, but this time not to a left and right, but to a front, a back and a front. Okay, so any movements that happen perpendicular to that pane of glass is going to be happening in the frontal plane. So again, this is where I lose people here sometimes, but stay with me. If you were going to be doing a side or lateral raise, a side raise, like an exercise for the shoulder, you are moving perpendicular to the plane that's cutting me in half, or the piece of glass, and you are working in the frontal plane. So less movements are happening in this plane. So if you talk about your leg doing abduction and adduction, or if your arm is going into abduction and adduction, anything out to the side is going to be falling in that plane. So if you think about exercises where your leg is moving out to the side and moving back in, it's quite an isolated movement and would not probably fall into an exercise plan for a beginner, unless, or even an intermediate, unless you're being quite specific and you're targeting certain areas of the body. Women, more so than men, prefer to do movements in the frontal plane for the lower body. There's a machine that is quite famous where you're blocking your knees in, and then you're literally moving in and outwards. So that would be working in the frontal plane, because your movement is happening out to the side and back. You know what machine I'm talking about. There's a certain word that people, or there's a certain phrase people use for that machine, but because this is the Train Me Academy account, I am not going to mention the name of the machine in case it offends someone, or at least that name of the machine. Let's move on. The next plane I want to talk about is the horizontal plane. The horizontal plane would divide the body, so it would cut through the umbilicus. It would divide the body into the top and the bottom half. Okay, so imagine the plane of glass is cutting me through here. So in order for you to do a movement that is perpendicular to a piece of glass that's cutting me through my stomach and is dividing me into the top and bottom half, this is when I normally ask the question, guys, what movements can you think of that fits into the horizontal plane? And then is normally followed by a long silence, followed by some crickets, and then I end up having to give the answer. If anyone that's online knows the answer, or can answer, it's not just one answer, it can think of a movement where is happening while you're moving in the horizontal plane, now's the time. Now's the time to do it. Okay, so the front, let me give you some time to see if you can actually yeah, there's crickets. Okay, cool, there's crickets. So in order for you to be moving in the sagittal plane, you need to be moving perpendicular to the piece of glass. So any movement when you are actually twisting your arm, so if your arm is by your side and you twisted it inwards and outwards, then that would be working in the horizontal plane. Or if you are twisting your body in a certain movement, maybe like a Russian twist, you are moving in perpendicular to the plane of glass that's cutting me in half. So this is normally a type of movement that is only put into more advanced programming, because as soon as you add twisting, you are throwing your body off of its center of gravity. And when you move the body off of its center of gravity, you are having to make sure that you balance, make sure that you hold a certain contraction so that you don't hurt yourself, and that just puts that movement almost immediately into the advanced category. There are some exercises that are in the horizontal plane that fit into the intermediate, but it's more so when we're looking at advanced programming. So I'm not going to touch too much on it now because I want to go with the example that I explained earlier. So let's move on. The last plane that I want to speak about, and then we can get away from the terms and the boring stuff, is the oblique plane. The oblique plane cuts the body through in an oblique angle, so it cuts like at a diagonal angle such as this, okay? And there's even fewer movements that fit into the oblique plane. I'm just going to go out and say it. If you are doing some sort of wood chopper, so pretend that there is maybe a cable machine that's at the top. You take the cable machine, you pull it across the midline of the body, and in order to get to the oblique muscles, you kind of cross in through the body in that horizontal fashion, and that's when you're actually working in the oblique plane. Again, not something that we're really going to be talking about a lot, especially not today, but now it's good for you guys to know those terms, because when I talk about the programming moving forward and I bring up these terms, I will try always explain or move with my body so that I'm utilizing the video, but it's going to assist us in actually just explaining things a heck of a lot better. Cool. So let's move on with our example. You're a complete beginner. You want to be getting yourself into exercise. I would keep every single movement that you do as a beginner in the sagittal plane. So meaning, if you do, and another tip that I want to give you is stick to movements that mimic everyday life. If you are sedentary, or if you have never exercised regularly, your body is only used to what conditions you've put it under. So that means all of your joints, all of your muscles, pretty much everything in your body is only really used to you doing what we need to do. And in modern day society, that's not a whole lot. It's kind of rolling out of bed and walking to our cars, and then walking from the car to the office, or whatever people do nowadays. So for an example, stick to, when you are doing an exercise plan, you've just started, stick to movements in the sagittal plane, but also stick to movements that have mimicked what you are already doing in your everyday life. So if you bend down and tie your shoelace and you stand back up, that's kind of like doing a squat. Maybe not a full squat, because you're probably keeping your legs as straight as possible, or you're putting your foot up on something, or you're sitting down to tie your shoelace. Whatever the scenario is, basically what I want to get through to you is, rather start with a squatting movement if you want to be working the lower body, as opposed to a lunging movement right off the get-go. Lunges are really good, but if you want to stick to the complete basics, do a squatting movement for the lower body. And I would even go as far, if someone is a complete beginner, or maybe they're overweight or something like that, you would not do even though I'm a huge advocate of functional training, I would not make that person do a full squat. I would make them only squat to halfway, about 90 degrees. So 90 degrees means that the hip crease of your leg kind of lines up with your knee joint, and so you kind of get that from standing up, you kind of get the 90-degree angle, and then back to a full extension. Hope that is all clear for everyone, and especially if you're thinking about the complete beginner program and staying as safe as possible to make sure that this person's body, when they are now moving themselves into a space where their heart rate is increasing more than they're used to, their muscles are now working for a longer period of time than what they're used to. Because what is an exercise program, or what is an exercise plan? It's segmented movements that happen subsequently in a particular order for a certain amount of time, which obviously is getting a response from the body. And in order for your body to be able to balance itself out, we need that homeostasis principle that I spoke about in the very first Tip Tuesday to be working with us and not against us, to make sure that we're as comfortable as possible when you are exercising. Because if you're a beginner and you're not comfortable in your exercise and you're not having fun, you're definitely not going to be coming back. And also so that it's as safe as possible, because if you're injured, you're not going to be able to be exercising. You should definitely not exercise when you're injured. Let's move on to our question. So I want to stick to that for today, because I'm desperately trying to make these videos shorter, and then I look up and it's 20 minutes in. Neil, I don't know how you can, I don't even know how I do this. Anyway, so we have two really cool questions today. Thank you for the questions. I'm going to start off with the one that's relevant to what I've already just been talking about. And the question is, why exercising or HIIT training can make you sick? Oh, this sounds like a very controversial, and some people will be like, how would exercising ever make you sick? So let's first define sickness. Sickness can just be when your body's immune system is not functioning quite as pristinely as it would like to. So in most cases, when someone is not exercising, not eating healthily, and ingesting a lot of bad things on a day-to-day basis as a result of high stress levels, bad diet, not enough water, putting weird and wonderful things on their skin. There's a multitude of things that contribute to an immune system being not at its best. And we like to, in today's society, we like to give us more and more conditions, and we get more and more big. I'm not going to go off topic now. I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to bring it back. Okay, so in the example of someone that is exercising regularly, how can exercise or HIIT training specifically make you sick? So just as I've just said, if we put our bodies under stress, it tends to knock our immune system. And high intensity interval training is a beautiful form of training to save time and to burn a lot of calories and put your body under quite a lot of stress in quite a short time. That's a positive, especially if you have a really hectic schedule. There is always a kickback. It's never just sunshines and rainbows and unicorn farts. I don't know why a unicorn fart would be a good thing, but that's just what popped into my head. The bad side of it is, because you are putting your body under such a lot of stress for a short period of time, meaning you're getting a lot of work done in a short amount of time, there is a huge spike in what you are acquiring from your body now. Because if you are actually doing HIIT training, when you are doing a bout or a round or whatever you want to call it, you are pushing your heart rate above 85% of your maximum, and you are working in the anaerobic zone, so your muscles are firing pretty much at full steam ahead. And in order for your body to give you that response and make you, or allow you to move like that, it then needs to be able to recover. And if you do too many or exercise too much without enough rest and without doing all those other magical things to make sure that you are dealing better with your stress, you're eating better foods, you're cutting out hormones and blah 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 fish paste, you're putting your body under duress by exercising either too much or at too high intensities for too long period of time. And that has a negative effect on the body, just as like normal work stress does. And so that can knock your immune system, and when your immune system is down, you are more likely to get infections, and you're more likely to injure yourself. So in my own example, where this happened to me, when I found out about this firsthand, I was doing CrossFit. It was about the 3rd year I had been doing CrossFit, moving into my 4th year. I was being super ambitious this particular year because I wanted to see if I could make something of a CrossFit career, or see if I could do it. And I was training 6 times a week, or 6 days a week, sometimes multiple times a day. I did about think I was doing a CrossFit competition every 2 months, so I was recycling into like heavy loads over and over so that I would peak into my training. I was basically taking the piss out of my body, to be honest. And I started getting lots of ear infections and throat infections, and this has never happened to me before. I was like, why am I getting sick? I'm so healthy. I was eating really well. I was doing as much as I could to recover, but I was still giving my body so much there that it started kicking back and my immune system got knocked down, and then I started getting infections. The person that asked the question just said that makes so much sense. Can't believe this isn't common knowledge. I'm super glad that it's valuable to you, and if you understand the basics of how the body works, you can obviously logically deduce it, but I'm glad that I was just able to connect the dots, because I'm sure this is things that people know. Is it things that people know? I'm not 100% sure. Let's quickly get to my last question before I run out of time. And it is a question about bloating. Any tips for bloating? I don't think it's worded very nicely. If you do want to bloat, then I think this was a good question, but I'm assuming that you don't want to be bloated. This ties into finding out what works better for your body and what doesn't. So in the Train Me Academy 6-week challenge, I have a weekly coaching video of frequently asked questions, and I just kind of help walk you through the process of the first 6 weeks, because the first 6 weeks is kind of that like foundation phase, and then from there we want to kind of move you forward. But what I talk about in one of those videos specifically is kind of being your own nutritionist, taking note of when you eat a certain kind of food, how do you feel? First of all, within like 20 minutes to an hour after eating that meal, are you energized or are you feeling kind of lethargic? Is your body bloating, or are you feeling nice and light and flat? Your stomach feels nice and flat. Just by doing this, and if you are following an eating plan, it's much easier to weed out what is working for you and what isn't. But just by doing that, your body immediately responds to what you put in it. As you drink a cup of coffee, if you're not like millions of people, or if you're like me, you drink a cup of coffee, within 20 minutes, bing, like you have energy. If you eat foods that are not agreeing with your system, or it could be the combination of foods that you're eating together that could be messing you around. But let's just kick it to a simple example. If you're eating foods that are not agreeing with you, your body is going to be telling you straight afterwards. So if you continue to eat these foods over and over, then you're going to be bloated for the whole day. But if there's a particular thing that you can find that is making you, you're bloating afterwards, try and find what it is. Single it out. Start removing one thing at a time, see how you feel afterwards, and then hopefully get to a place where you understand what foods work better with your body and what foods are not working so well with your body. That is going to conclude our first video on programming. I hope that gives you a baseline of what we need to know in order to expand on this topic a lot more quickly, because I felt that some of the last of Tuesday's videos, because I'm so long-winded, kind of dragged, and I was getting caught up in the boring stuff, and I want to get the stuff that you need to know done as quickly as possible. And then from that piece of information, hopefully I can expand on other topics or the topics moving forward a lot faster, because we'll understand the basics, and it's always important to know the basics. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you found value from this video, again, please share. It helps keep the Academy open. It helps me with my livelihood. This is my gig. I really, really need your assistance in order to keep the doors open and keep me making these videos, if they are obviously serving you. Have a good evening, and I will see you next week. And one quick last thing before you go, I'm doing a live video on my personal account tomorrow, because I feel that I've let some rants or some things that have been personally affecting me or irritating me slip out into my videos. And in order to remedy that, I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant about what's going on in the fitness industry now. So tune in tomorrow to my personal account at again 6 o'clock. Hope to see you there, and otherwise hope to see you guys next week. Thank you for joining.